welcome to the August meeting of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. We've got a packed agenda, so we'll try to get through everything fairly swiftly. Thanks everyone for coming. I'll make a note now in case we forget, if everyone could help us. What's the table deal for today?
It was like this when we got here.
It was like this when we got here, so if everyone could just help, maybe with some cups, washing cups and dishes. Make sure we leave the Grange all the way it was when we got here, that would be great. And without further ado, we'll do our intros, I'll pass the mic around, and then we'll get started. So I'm Pedro Marquez, Executive Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
I'm Tana Lynch, I'm the Associate Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
I'm Laura Ginsky, I'm the summer intern for the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
Lloyd Morris, George Manager.
Luke Watts, Montana DRC.
Caitlin Lloyd, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. Diane Hutton, Wisdom. Hi, I'm Carly, I'm the video producer of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
For China Limited. John Jackson, Rancher County Commissioner.
J.M. Beck, Rancher from Melrose.
K.W. Ryan, Rancher from Fremont Creek. Andy Boats with Bureau of Mines.
Mary Sutherland with the Bureau of Mines. Diana Morris, Rancher from Beasley.
I'm Jim Keenan with the Big Hole, from the Big Hole Watershed Committee. Youth Silver Bowl Water Utility.
Got your priorities straight.
Yeah, all right. Jim Griffin, you.
Mark Rafferty, Rancher Lower Big Hole.
Dean Peterson, Upper Big Hole Rancher. Mark Cabbage, Rancher Divide. Randy Smith, Rancher Glen.
Jim Hagan Garza, Rancher Glen.
Paul Moeller from Butte. Eddie Bowler, Butte.
You're all on the sidelines in the back. Sean Claffey with the Nature Conservancy out of Dillon, and coordinate the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership.
Jane Morrisbach, Wise River Fisher Person. Kathy Scott, Wise River.
And Scott, the other half. You miss someone? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, hi.
Josh Margolis, NBC Montana.
All right, we will get kicked off with our stream precip and snowpack report. You ready?
Let me, oh boy. Is it in here?
It's in the folder.
Yeah, that one. And then I gotta do all the things.
You just share.
Okay, that one's going, but now I gotta share it. Hold on. I'm rusty, guys. I'm totally rusty. This one. Awesome. Is that it?
So I'm Luke Watts, I'm the DNRC hydrologist for the Big Hole. This month, we just installed a new real-time site on the North Fork of the Big Hole. This is at the battlefield.
There it goes.
So this is all the gauges on the Big Hole River. DNRC has our own real-time gauges like the one I just mentioned at this website on stage, as well as USGS sites on here as well. And then right about here is where that new steering gauge is, not on the map yet, but. So all these are going to be broken down into the drought management sections of the Big Hole Watershed Committee. As under, so section 1 is Saginaw Bridge to the North Fork of the Big Hole confluence. This is measured at the wisdom gauge. This morning it was right around 5 CFS. It's been a full river closure since the 19th of July. And then this colored line is the same time as the previous line.
It is shocking, yes.
Same conditions as last year.
It's kind of ended up in the same place, more or less.
It's pretty close, yeah. We've had, both years have been pretty poor, as most people here know, so. Section 2 is Wisdom down to Dickey Bridge. This is a DNRC gauge. Right now, we're hovering around 94 CFS, which is close to that FWP river closure. The whole river is under FEOC restrictions if they're not already fully closed, so. Section 3, that's Sticky Bridge to Maiden Rock, that's USGS gauge, it was at 176 this morning. And section 4, there's 2 gauges, Melrose and Glen. Melrose is at 158 this morning and 167 there at Glen. And then section 5 is also been in a full river closure since the 23rd. This morning is around 47 CFS. There's been an issue with the gauge, so this is all provisional data, but yeah, 47 CFS. No snowpack, obviously, so like that precipitation, we're sitting at 85% of median normal conditions. Most of the Beaverhead and Pioneer side is kind of bringing the average down. Some of the Fenway stuff is looking on average for this water year so far. And then these are just the NOAA outlooks. This is the 2-week outlook above, nearing above for precipitation, and then above average for temperature. Nearing above average for precipitation is not a lot in this time of year, so it's not gonna be a lot in general. And then also, next slide, the seasonal, which really hasn't changed, above average temperatures and below average precipitation. And then this is the US drought monitor showing pretty much a spatial precipitation index. Beaver County, we're in D2, D1 conditions, not as bad as the Bitterroot, Blackfoot, and Upper Clark Fork, but yeah, we're not the only ones who are dealing with the tough water here for sure. But yep, that's our precipitation report. Any questions from anybody?
Question for you. Do you know comparatively how we're sitting at the wisdom gauge compared to 2021, the last drought year that we had those?
2021, I don't have 2020, I think it was pretty poor. 2021 is actually very similar to the conditions that we had this year. You know, like in terms of precipitation and temperature, it's almost identical, really. It's kind of bizarre. Wisdom was like 3 CFS on July 1st in 2021, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we've been low since mid-June, but not that low.
All right. Any more questions?
Yep.
Yeah.
So what does it have to be in the record for
If you want to go back.
Yeah.
So these little charts here, those are the specific river closures for each section. So like for section 4, a full river closure would happen if one of these gauges got below 150 CFS. So it changes between each section. Correct.
Yeah, it's very close. And then that supersedes Hoot Owl because you're not fishing anyway. Right.
Correct.
So as soon as you close the river, then Hoot Owl's off because you're not fishing.
You're not fishing anyways, yeah.
Right. And then are we expecting then section 2?
I do not see it likely improving. Most of the tributaries are lacking and there's honestly not a lot of irrigation going on other than some soft water here and there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't see it really improving unless we get rain.
Right.
Which is not looking great either, so.
All right. Will you? No. Yeah.
Yeah,
you
I
flip
can
my-
pull up here.
All right. Appreciate it. I'll go next. As Tana pulls my presentation up. Yeah, we'll get in. I mean, I'll follow up and talk a little bit about stream flows and the fact that there is no water in the tributaries brings up an issue that I'll bring up here in the next slide. But so I guess I want to start with just some board and staff thank yous and recognitions. Andy Cinerum, who's been a longtime board member, gave me a note earlier, a month or so ago, that he is going to be stepping down from the governing board. And he's been a long time, don't know how long he's been with us, but it's been quite a long time. He's an attorney in Dillon and has been very helpful with sort of navigating anything that has to do with lawsuits. He's been an ear that I can count on to go through litigation and kind of understand what the legal ramifications of everything that's going on. So We will lose him as a board member. I will not lose him on my quick dial, on my phone, and I will keep reaching out to him the same way I have been, but we lose him as a governing board member. So let's see. Want to thank John Peterson, who is not here right now, but he's been our hydro tech for the summer. This is a position that we were testing out this year. We got an awesome flow meter, and we're always asking questions about how much water is there, whether it's irrigation water or in streams. And John just kind of took the bull by the horns this year, and I put a bunch of dots on the map, and he went out everywhere I showed him and got a lot of good data for us. Met folks, got to visit different parts of the watershed, and he's back at school now at MSU. He's going to keep doing a couple more measurements for us over the weekends and probably wrap up the season here pretty soon. But I think it's been fairly successful, and part of our effort with drought management to try to quantify actually how much conservation is happening on ranches. It's a tricky thing. It's a delicate issue, but I think having a known entity and just a great guy to have no problem, knocking on doors and talking to people about water. It's worked out really well. Hopefully we can continue that next year. We've got grant money from the Bureau of Reclamation to fund that position next year, so hopefully he's still interested. And I want to thank Emma. After year 2 of being our intern, she discovered us through a Wild Rockies Field Institute course, and Ben and I were leading some projects, and she just got so excited about acting like a beaver that she came back last year, and we filled her with a summer full of work, and then she called and said, I want to do it again. And so she's been here for a couple months, and she'll present after me on some of the work that she's been doing. So it's been a blast having you back with us. And a couple other things on sort of for the board to just start thinking about, we have 2 deficits, I would say, in terms of our staffing. One is our ability to communicate often and well, and also in a format that most people are using more and more, which is video. And so I think we had a grant that has funded Carly's position up until now, and there's a lot of good stuff that's come out of that, and I think it's worth keeping going. So that's a discussion that I think we should be having as a board about just keeping that communications going. The videos, the way Carly's been able to kind of understand the complexities of the work that we do and synthesize it down to really easily digestible and fun and content has been great. And I think there's some expansion that can happen there. And the other one is restoration specialist. With Ben leaving us last fall, there was no way I could rehire before I took off, but there's definitely a need. We've got so many projects. It's just a lot for one person to handle and to be physically present in all the locations that we have to be in. So that's another position that I think we're in a good spot to look at filling this fall. So just board members, keep that in mind. We'll be talking with the steering committee here in the next week or 2 about the logistics of making that happen, but we'll need all of your approvals before we move forward. I want to just get that in your minds. I'll run over a couple funding things. As I said before, irrigation projects without fish are really hard to fund. I think I've landed the one funding source that's even viable is through the NRCS. It's a water management entities grant. I sat down with Kyle Tackett to discuss that grant. There's a lot of moving parts at the NRCS right now. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to get funded, but the way it looks from the federal level down, the NRCS is likely to be one of the departments that stays the most whole as far as funding levels, if not increasing funding levels. And so learning about the NRCS programs and starting to figure out how to tap into them is going to be important. So we've got a couple irrigation projects lined up that we need to find funding for. We've gotten some state funding approved for them, but anyway. All this stuff. This is the stuff that takes hours and hours and hours to figure out, right? And this is, when you talk to people about what we do as a watershed committee, one of the things we don't communicate well with people because it's kind of wonky and sloggy is just the time it takes to understand these programs, find the right people, find the right specialists, glue everything together, write the grants, get the money. So I'm not letting that go. there's three important projects that we need to get done, so I'm gonna keep going after them. One is the, company ditch off of the Wise River, one is a ditch off of Jerry Creek, and the other one is this double diversion south of Melrose. That is just a wonky, two diversions in the same place, and it's terrible for boaters, and it needs a fix, but it's expensive, it's like one of these $500,000 rock steps down off the river. Working on that one. We've got a sediment project that we've been pursuing off of the Burma Road, one of these big dry gullies that a couple years ago, there was a rainstorm just parked on top of it, and so much sediment came out of this thing that it destroyed the Burma Road. Local folks there are really concerned about it. I think we've got a good approach, and we've got a 319 project kind of gearing up for a winter application. I think that was kind of a slam dunk for the 319 program and sediment reduction. And also been partnering with a couple other groups that are very much interested in more of this kind of dryland erosion control, mesic restoration. We just threw a big polygon onto a map and let Pheasants Forever apply for a big grant, and we'll see if we get it. And that'll direct some funding over to the Highlands area, to that Highlands country. And I'll keep you all posted on that. Similar work to what we've done before in other places. We applied for some funding to the Trout Salmon Foundation for the Smith Stage Springs Reconnect project. Also applied to the High Stakes Foundation specifically to support communications and content. And then other things on the funding level. Recently, we've been either told or gifted about $40,000 worth of private donations have come in the door, and a commitment for another 20,000 from one of those landowners. And then a guitar auction, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Tim at the Wise River Club and Billy Gibbons, rock and roll superstar. Tana will talk more about that in her presentation. Any questions so far? I mean, I'm running through projects just because there's a lot to get through. But if anyone has a question about one of these, I'm happy to answer. No? Okay. Just kind of a little, just sort of a funding snapshot. There's $195,000 of invoices out the door and about 130 grand in contractor bills to pay. And this is sort of where we're at compared to last year. It's still a lot going on, amazingly, for a lady on maternity leave and a guy not even in the country. We're still moving and shaking. I talked about this Army Corps of Engineers nationwide permit at last meeting. It looks like it went through unchanged. I think last meeting, it was going to public comment. It looks like it hasn't been altered, and so by March 1st of next year, it will save a lot of people a lot of headache to do low-tech kind of process-based restoration. The types of projects that we've done a lot of that you'll hear Emma talking about. Typically, you've got to get a wetland delineation from the Army Corps. It costs about $10,000 a mile to do that. They've now written wetland delineations out of the requirements for doing that kind of work and added more ability to if you partner with another federal agency and they have an agreement with the landowner, the Army Corps basically looks the other way. So we've dramatically improved the regulatory process for getting restoration on the ground. And Big Old Watershed Committee is the only small non-national group on the list of restoration groups that basically made this happen. So that's, you know, I've been talking about this probably for like 4 years at these meetings, that I was like engaged in these meetings, and like, it happens, like stuff happens. It's hard to, it's like a slow moving tsunami kind of thing. All right, public comment. As you all know, the litigants, I'll just say the litigants, it's always the same ones, have litigated, and they're suing FWP for not calling their Murphy rights. And this is kind of related to what Luke was saying. There's nothing coming out of the tributaries. So one way to sort of respond to this is, where are you going to get your water from if there's no water, even if you call a Murphy right? But we've been down this road. We had these discussions. FWP came to our meetings several times last year, and we had a lot of good conversation and dialogue with them about the Murphy right thing. So Murphy rights are water rights granted to fish, wildlife, and parks for in-stream habitat for fish, basically. They are fairly old water rights, is 1980, something like that.
1960.
60, okay, which is still a fairly old water right in comparison.
They're younger.
Yeah, sorry, they're young rights. That's what I meant to say, yeah. They're young rights relative to, 1890s and 1900 water rights. I'm gonna be very careful with my words. You all know how I feel about some of this stuff. But the first thing I did is I got on the horn with the Blackfoot Challenge and they felt the same way, sort of equally irritated, and that this is a nothing burger of a lawsuit. It's not gonna go anywhere. It doesn't really have teeth. It was very sloppily put together and had a lot of inaccurate information in the lawsuit itself about what, on the Blackfoot itself, the FYWP has made a bunch of calls for the compact and all of that. So what we'd like to do, and we've been talking to the steering committee about this, I think we've got somewhat of a green light to put together a letter to just get something out in the public to provide a different perspective on Murphy rights, and that is the voluntary drought management that the Big Hole and the Blackfoot Challenge have been running for 30 years now. The goodwill, the partnership, the cooperation that's come out of those programs goes far beyond just putting water back in the river. I've gotten several calls, even outfitters have been texting me saying they've been watching the gauge, and when we put that email out about, everyone please cooperate as much as you can, and they've literally watched the stream go up. And we've kept the river out of that 150 range. Rain helped, that was part of it, but a lot of cooperation is going on. Ranchers are sharing information. Most folks are at like 30 to 40% of their water right as is. And the water they are putting on the fields, a lot of it is coming back into the river, and it's keeping sub-irrigation up so that crops don't completely dry out. And that's gonna, if that happens, you have to use more water the following spring to fill that water back up. So there's a function that's out there on the landscape that's really important that's going on. Yeah, it's scary to think what happens if we go back to a system where, the person with the biggest water right just comes out and starts calling everybody else. There's senior water right holders on the Big Hole that could call FWP on all of theirs. And then, what does that get us, right? So if anyone has any questions or comments on that particular issue now, we can have a little back and forth about that. But I think my goal would be to get a letter, a strongly worded, a positive letter to let the public know of the benefits of voluntary drought management. I think it's the best thing that we have going, and it's extremely rare these days that a group so large is kind of keeping a river wet because we're all cooperating. So we should keep that going, and that should be supported.
So Pedro, the Murphy rights, how does that work in terms of rivers that are adjudicated? So they're adjudicated to have Murphy rights to the state, or?
This is where Andy would be really helpful. Jim, you want to watch that?
Murphy rights, the rights that were given, they're filed by the Fish and Game. Actually, they're on Missouri between I-90 and if that goes below a certain segment, then they can call their water rights. The Murphy rights have the same legal standing as all of our rest of our rights. But it's very difficult to call the Murphy rights when they're down so low. The rivers are adjudicated, but that doesn't mean anything until the courts provide how they're going to manage that adjudication and get commissioners to manage the water on each of the rivers. So until we get the adjudication done, it's going to be very difficult for any of us to call for a water right.
Yeah. The visual that comes to my mind is, okay, let's say you call the right. Someone's literally got to watch that water go all the way down, and it's got to make it all the way down the river, all the way through the Jeff, all the way to the Missouri, right? And I don't see that happening anytime soon. So it is what I thought, where I thought we had landed is that calling Murphy rights in the Big Hole would be a futile call. And that's the same way that folks in Blackfoot feel about it as well. because even when we were talking about it, FWP admitted, yeah, we'll, if we made the call, we wouldn't have anyone on the ground to enforce it. So then it's like, what's the point? Anyway, here we are again, another litigation, and we've got to kind of respond to it. And this kind of goes back to the need to have more capacity to do more communication more often with the public, to sort of change the narrative and change people's ideas. As folks benefit, the folks that do the litigation, they benefit from the drama and and the press about it. I'm gonna shut up before I say something stupid.
Is it a 5-foot challenge that's the defendant in that case?
No, they're suing the state, they're suing FWP.
Oh.
They're saying FWP, you're not doing your job calling these rights, you should be calling the rights. The challenge in us, I think we've been the two organizations running these 30-year programs. So I feel like, a statement coming from the two organizations would be hopefully well received, and Trout Unlimited would potentially sign on to that also, and that comes with its own considerations. Now, any questions for me?
Where the litigants want the water to go past the line, if it's going through the Jeff and it's already here.
So the water rights that they have go, I don't know where those Murphy rights are. Maybe it's Knoxon, the reservoir.
I don't think the Murphy rights are, they're
It's compact.
compact.
Yeah, it's compact. It's compact rights.
In the middle, dam.
Yeah.
Down dam.
Yeah, it's Milltown Dam rights, but the CSKT have those rights, and that's a whole conversation. Yeah, it's different. Some of the principles are the same, but it's executed a little bit differently there. And the Blackfoot, they do call, CSKT calls any non-participating landowner there, so it's tricky. Anyway. All right, any more for me?
One question on the Army Corps stuff, Pedro.
Yeah.
Are they indicating at all what they want to see in place for wetlands delineation? Characterization?
It would be what's in the regs is that you just have to do a simple characterization of the place where you're gonna work. So what the attorney, basically Laura Zemer at Trout Unlimited, we worked together over like 4 years for her to understand it. And what she did was change the language so that the Corps is not looking at a plus minus wetland gain or loss, where you have to do this detailed calculation. They're looking at, are you functionally improving the habitat? And if you can demonstrate that, you don't need to delineate the wetlands and count them. If you're doing any kind of mitigation or in lieu fee program, anything like that, then it's still the same kind of rules apply for wetland delineation. But big save. All right. Emma, you ready?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's hear from Emma about some of what she was up to this summer. Got it? Yeah, a little bit more. Just got to get right there. Awesome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma. As Pedro mentioned, I was here last summer and I loved it so much I came back. This summer, I spent most of my time, almost all of my time, in the Mount Hagen Wildlife Management Area doing low-tech process-based restoration. So let's get into it, and I'll talk a little bit about some of my projects that I worked on. So a lot of what I was doing out there was building beaver dam analogs, and also we did a little bit of flash filters and check dams for erosion mitigation. In total, we built 94 in-stream beaver dam analogs and 25 Gobi erosion control structures. I've been here since early July, so it's only been 7 weeks and we got a lot done. I worked with 3 different crews. First, I was with Watershed Restoration Group. We went to Muddy Gulch. We built, beaver dams in Muddy Gulch, Joiner Gulch, and
California.
California. Yeah, so we did a lot. So I spent 8 days out with the Watershed Restoration Group. I spent a day with Wild Rockies Field Institute, building BDAs in Oregon Creek. And I just actually finished a hitch with Montana Conservation Corps today. We did a little bit of lupin seeding that I'll get into later on, but we also built some BDAs that we finished up this morning in the North Fork of California Creek. So overall, we hit 4 different drainages and got a lot done. Here's some photos of what this is, one of the beaver dams that we built. We got a Worthy kid building a beaver dam there. The next photo is someone on Montana Conservation Corps. And the photo way on the right there is one of the Gully check dams that I built with Watershed Restoration Group. So, yeah.
And that one's on top of one that,
Yeah, so that one is a check dam that we built on top of a previously built check dam from probably years prior. All the sediment had filled in, so on ones where we clearly saw that they were working, and they were catching a lot of sediment, we built on top of them in order to keep them doing their thing. Yeah, and I wanted to get into one project in particular, this Upper Joyner Gulch. So this was with Watershed Restoration Group. We spent 3 days in Upper Joyner Gulch. This was a particularly challenging project. So essentially, we went there to build beaver dam analogs. It's a pretty heavily degraded system because basically what you have is a stream running alongside very bare and steep hillsides. Here in this photo, you can see that essentially it's all that fine volcanic tough parent material right off the banks of the stream. And when you have that, then you're going to see essentially a stream that has very heavy sediment loads. If a huge rainstorm came through, then a ton of sediment would move downstream and harm the fisheries. So we hadn't previously done any work in this system. It was a 2-mile hike out to the site every day. So it was a hard place to get to, and it was a hard place to build because you have all this volcanic tough material, you don't have a lot of nice solid mats that are usually really necessary for building BDAs that back up water. So essentially what we did was we built 43 structures in 3 days and did as much as we could to build structures that would back up sediment. When you build a structure that is able to back up that much sediment, even if you don't have a lot of sod, you'll basically, over time, that sediment will build up, it'll increase the stream bed floor, increasing the water table, and then you'll eventually get vegetation growing on the banks again. So the hope was that essentially we'll back up sediment so there's not as much going downstream in the short term, but also in the long term, we hope that we'll see more vegetation growing on the banks and the system will become less erosive over time. Yeah, it was a really fun pitch and it was challenging, but it was great. Here in these photos, you can see in the top one, that was like the first day we were out building in the wet and the rain. And there's a photo of me just showing off a structure we had built. Yeah, so another project we got into that kind of strayed away from a lot of the low-tech structures that we were building was lupin seeding in West Joyner Gulch. So this project was really exciting for me because I had never done a seed dispersal project and I didn't really know that much about lupin going into it. I did a lot of research beforehand and actually got some insights from Jessie, a botanist with the Forest Service, and she gave me a lot of tips and tricks. But essentially, this site was very exciting because West Joyner Gulch is at essentially the headwaters of the watershed. We're up on an extremely exposed hill where we previously dozer pitted and aerially seeded and fertilized, but we essentially got to a point where the seeding and the fertilizing wasn't doing much anymore. But the interesting thing about lupin is that lupin is a natural nitrogen fixer. So lupin will, by just growing in an area, they will increase the fertility of the soil and enhance the soil composition so that maybe it will give way to more vegetation growing in the area. So yeah, basically what we did was we went over to a nearby hillside that was growing lupin, and we picked out 2 different sites here and here that hadn't seen any lupin colonization. So we collected lupin. Also, I should have mentioned this was with Montana Conservation Corps. So my first 2 days out with them, we were doing this, and Yeah, it was a lot of fun for them. It was new to all of us, but we collected lupin from a nearby hillside and we collected as many seeds as we could and we dispersed the seeds and we applied 4 different treatments. So the first one was just seeding and kicking a little bit of dirt on top, and that was kind of our control treatment. We did a little bit of a science experiment in order to know exactly under what conditions lupin will be most likely to germinate. So we had one section, here you can see the different treatments. We had one that was just seed and kick, another one we also applied coconut fabric on top. It's a naturally biodegradable material that will collect water and also will hold down the lupin seeds so that they don't blow away and so that animals can't graze on them. And it's just another layer of protection and water catchment. We also used wood chips as another method for just protecting lupin seeds and enhancing likelihood of germination. We were curious whether wood chips or coconut fabric would be more successful. And then we also had a treatment that was using coconut fabric and wood chips. So essentially, we wanted to do a little experiment in order to best understand how lupin will best grow. And we had a larger plot up here where we just did the coconut fabric and we did a bit of seeding and kicking. So yeah, I'm really curious to come back to this area and see if we get any lupin plants growing next spring. We'll just have to see. Yeah, it was a really fun project.
Wait.
Yeah, so anyway, I have an extra slide of just like great photos I got of crews working out in the field. I had a lot of fun working with crews and getting to do a bit of supervising, a bit of managing, and everyone had great attitudes and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, it was a great summer in the field and I'm so grateful to the Watershed Committee for having me back and yeah, hope to see you guys all again soon.
Yeah.
We've loved having you and you've done an awesome job. But I just want to ask, wait, could you go back? Oh, no, I just forgot what I was gonna ask. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. I'll come back to it.
Where did you get your wood chips?
This was actually a gift from Nolan. He had a source and he got a truckload of wood chips for free. Do you remember where they were from?
No idea.
It was like, I think it was some mill where it was just a waste product and they gave it to people for free. Yeah, this project was like a result of, or like the experiment was a result of a lot of very friendly collaboration. I was just talking with Jesse and then Nolan was like, I know where to get wood chips. And Pedro was like, we've got some coconut fabric. And then it became something that I think has a lot more likelihood of seeing success. At first, we were just gonna do the seeding and kicking. So adding the wood chips and the coconut fabric gives me a lot more hope that we're gonna see germination in the spring and we're gonna see some plants growing.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Great presentation. You did a great job and I could hear everything, which isn't always the case. I just wondered how many people were on those crews, the Conservation Corps, how many, I don't know, man hours or, I don't know.
Yeah.
People were working with it.
So with Watershed Restoration Group, there were 4 people on that crew, so 5 including me. And they did 10-hour days and they did a full 8-day hitch and I was with them for 7 out of the 8 days. I don't know, I can't do the math on the man hours, but
Yeah, no.
definitely they put in a lot of work. And then we had the Wild Rockies Field Institute crew that was
5 or 6.
5 or 6,
Yeah.
yeah. So we only spent a day with them, but we built, I think it was 7 BDAs in Oregon Creek. And then with Montana Conservation Corps, there were 4 of them. So they did 8-hour days. So yeah, like the crews are pretty small, but they get a lot done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I remember my question. So what's the monitoring plan? Who's gonna check up on it next year? And is it Pedro?
I think it's Pedro.
Cool. Well, I know you're busy next summer, but you'll let us know how it's going.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I want to see you.
And these things, typically what I found, year 1 is disappointing and then year 2 is usually when you see a response,
Right.
a better response.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. Well, then maybe I'll be here.
That's right.
Oh.
Forget it. Question, Ed?
Natural irrigation or irrigate to begin with, to improve the germination.
Oh, yeah, we didn't irrigate. Essentially, we were trying to mimic the natural process of lupin plants, and I know that they need the winter to, like, they need to experience that scarification in order to germinate, so I figured, you know, I don't wanna mess with the process, but,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's no way to get water up there.
Also true.
Just a good old rain
Yeah.
dance.
Just a rain dance. That's right. That's right. That's right. Oh, those people that work near water, yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Emma.
And I was so excited to get Emma up here, I totally spaced. Can you zoom me the thing? I totally spaced on like slides of other projects. So we're still on restoration program update. Real quick, I just wanted to give, you know, give an update on all of the things that we're doing. There's a lot going on. Thank you, Tana.
Oh, there we go.
And yeah, we'll just go to, oh yeah, back one.
I'm sorry.
So.
It's just
Little
slow.
time delay. Okay, real quick, I won't go through every one of these, but this is where we're working in the watershed, and there's more on the next page. I'll just give you a couple updates on the Elkhorn Preserve Lazy S Ranch. We're working on a landowner agreement. We're almost there, almost there. And that's gonna be 3 miles of riparian planting just about, and another mile and a little bit of fencing. And then now we're looking at Ranching for Rivers program to fence off another pasture right around the Wise River. I'm pretty excited about that project. Most of that will go down next year. Right next door, we have a project with our Camper Shore Ranch, kind of making a spawning channel for fish to come up into a nice channel, but we've got to constrict the channel, sort of rebuild it so that the right size gravels are there to attract the fish. Jim Olson has been leading that one up. It's more complicated than what the engineers made it sound like, so we're trying to get some of the work done with the money that we have. We can't get all of it done for the money that we got. So that one's still going. Got designs approved. We're working on designs for Restoration of California Creek. I've shown these in previous meetings. I'll show a couple photos of our East Pioneers Conifer Encroachment work. I'm not gonna say much about Conifer Encroachment because that's our subject for today. Supporting FWP on 2 stock tank projects as much as they need, wherever that goes. The Elkhorn Mine and Mill, the forest somehow found another $300,000 and put it in our partnership agreement. So we're sitting on like $800,000 to move that project. This is a big remedy. The first thing we're doing, I'll show some photos. And then the biofiltration design has been contracted as well. And I'll show you some slides. Moose Creek headwaters, we're talking beaver, we're talking dynamite. It's awesome. So this is the mill at the Elkhorn Mine, right? This is the mill site taking from the bottom. There's Emma and Nolan actually collecting some soil. We are, so the 2 things that are happening is some of the columns on this structure are cracking and not doing well. That building is at risk of falling down. So the former forest supervisor closed the site down once we got her up there and she realized the danger. We're designing some jacketing to fix the columns because we can't get in there with machinery until that building is stable. So that's step 1. Uh-oh.
I got you.
Yeah, we'll get an extension cord. That's step 1. And then we've got our microbiologist. This stuff is so cool. I try not to geek out on it, but this orange stuff right here, our microbiologist grabbed some of the orange sediment. This is the adit water that's flowing out of the 1,000-foot adit every day. They grabbed some of the orange stuff and just grew it in an antibacterial agar. There's like 6 different types of fungi living on that brown crap, which is really interesting. It's like kind of like what they're doing at the Berkeley pit and like trying to find anything that can live in that. It's got to be useful for something, right? So anyway, when a microbiologist invites you over to look at an agar plate, you say yes, and you just like, you zone in and you just go for it. So I thought that was super interesting. One of the things that we're exploring now seems simple.
Fund, which funds restoration and conservation projects along the Big Boulder. All right, another exciting thing that happened recently, Pedro mentioned this, I think, in the past, but a Brazilian barnwood guitar was donated to us a while back, and we've been trying to figure out what to do with it. And we linked up with Tim Montana with the Wise River Club and Billy Gibbons with ZZ Top. He signed the guitar. And then Tim auctioned it off for us at the end of June and early into July, and it went for $9,500. So that's a donation to our conservation funds. Pretty awesome.
Took 3.5 years, I think.
We did not get to meet Billy Gibbons yet.
No,
Yet.
not yet.
So, events, recently, we had a table at the Montana Folk Festival again this year. It was a ton of fun, not quite as hot this year, which is nice. This is our setup. It's getting a little better each year. We had a lot of people come by and see us. We partner with the Butte Silver Bowl Water Utility Department or a water filling station there. That was a lot of fun. We also had an event on sandhill cranes in July. That was our Weather Speaker Series event at JM's Ranch, Sharp Creek Ranch in Melrose. And that was also a ton of fun. We had great food, which was donated by JM, and we heard from Patrick Donnelly with Ducks Unlimited. So I just wanted to give another huge thank you to JM Packing and Patrick Donnelly for that. Super fun event. And communications, I know this is hard to read, but they will all be in our minutes as well. So if you haven't caught these, there was an article that Pedro mentioned about the group suing FWP. Excuse me, that was in the Missoula Current. And then an article about hoot owls and how they provide a break for fish during the hot times. And then just a couple other interesting articles that have come out recently. This one about cloud seeding in the Big Hole, I thought was interesting because anytime there's anything goes on, the social about cloud seeding and responses, there's a really mixed bag, and a lot of people are really freaked out by it. So, and we know there's a lot of potential. I'm really excited to see the pilot study, see the results of the pilot study, but it's super fun.
All right.
Okay, weekly drought updates. These are going out every week by both text message and via email. If you'd like to get them via text message, you can text drought to 26989 and register, and just make sure you have your text messages turned on when you get those. Well, and if you prefer to get them through email, just make sure you're signed up for our email list and you'll get them that way. And they include information about current stream flow, the previous day's maximum temperature, the river status by sections, whether it's on hoot owl, close to fishing, open, and conservation actions that are taking place. So whether in the drought plan or whether we're in conservation status, prepare for conservation or what, and then the long-term average flow. So you can kind of see, section 1's at this flow historically, and this time of year would be here. So pretty interesting information if you were at all interested in the river and its flows. You want to get that. A quick one on our wildlife programs. So we had our carcass removal program ran in the spring. We picked up, I think there was 32 carcasses from 6 participants this year. That's a really small number of carcasses, but my understanding was that it was just a pretty good spring. And we didn't lose quite as many livestock as we have in past years, so that's a good thing. And our range rider program is up and running right now. It started July 1st and it goes through September 30th. And so our range rider, Chet Robertson, is patrolling Forest Service allotments in the upper Big Hole. He checks for livestock condition and then also wolf and grizzly presence, with the goal of helping livestock producers identify depredations from those animals and then get reimbursed for them when possible. So this year was really exciting about the range rider program. We got
I don't know what happened. Just keep talking.
Okay, so this year was really exciting. We finally were able to purchase a used 4-wheeler for our range rider program, which was really important. Chet has been using his for like 12 years and it was just we bought a new tires and put parts on it, but it had about 1 billion miles on it and it was ready. So we were able to find the exact same 4-wheeler, like a year old and 50 miles on it, and bought it, and Chet is just happy as can be. So unfortunately, our funding sources for our wildlife programs will not cover the 4-wheeler. So we are accepting donations. We've received some pretty good donations from some livestock producers in the area toward the offset the cost of that. But if anybody else wants to contribute, then you can do that on our website. And we just definitely appreciate it. Oh, and then we did get funding from Livestock Loss Board again for next year, so we requested a little bit less since we had some other funding sources, but they awarded us another $8,500 for our wildlife programs for next year, so
Okay,
that was it. I don't know what happened to our slides, but
that's really
that was
weird.
pretty much it for me.
Okay, no one's hiring us to be technical wizards, so, and then we have just right before break, we've got an update. MBMG wants to, you guys want to do a quick update on your for recharge project? Yes? Okay, we're making it up.
I'm only gonna make up my portion. So I am Mary Sutherland. I was supervising Jenna Doman. She's the one most of you are familiar with, who worked on the ground in the Glen project. Jenna has moved on to new projects as we wrap up the field work on the Glen project in November. She's been working up north of Helena, but we have been pulling together a report. The report is about 75% done. The plan is to have it turned in for review next month, mid next month. Now, before you get excited about that, the review process can be a bit lengthy. So we're looking for a technical reviewer right now, and we're hoping to have that out next year is the plan right now. And really interesting information came out of that. We're not talking about results quite yet because we need to have people review before we tell anybody anything for sure, but it was an interesting project and I'm hoping it will provide some insight into what's going on in the Glen area.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
All right, and I'm Andy Boast, so I'm the lead on the new WIP project, well, new as it last spring, over in the Wisdom area, where the question was, could we use managed aquifer recharge to store water in the spring and then use that water to enhance stream flows in the late summer. So really our focus on, is that physically realistic? Do we even have the aquifers that could potentially do that? Or, does it even make sense? And so in meeting with some of the board, we talked about, what realistically is the quantifiable goal that we have here. And so we talked about on the order of increasing flows by 5 CFS for 45 days. So when the stream flow drops below about 20 CFS, I'm doing a lot of arm waving here, then you could add that extra 5 CFS in. And so if we think about the flows we had last week were like 3 CFS, another 5 would have been pretty nice to have. Versus when it's running 500 CFS, you could stash that over. So obviously it's fairly early days of the project. We always get questions about water quality, water treatment prior to trying to do recharge. Water rights, of course, I'm not going to talk about any of that today because we don't know. But the overall project is essentially a 3-pronged approach where one part is to characterize the potential sources of water. So how much water is there throughout the year, both the main stem and tributaries, and what's the quality of that water and how does that change over time? The next is, are there suitable aquifers if we wanted to do aquifer storage and recovery, which is to inject the water and then bring it back out when you want it? So are we seeing that we have aquifers where that could work? And actually the results of our exploratory drilling so far have been much better than I thought they would be. So that's encouraging to think we can go on to the next step and do some aquifer testing, also looking at the compatibility of the potential recharge waters with the native groundwater and the native aquifer material, and see if geochemically we're likely to have issues with putting oxygenated surface water into these very low oxygen aquifers, and kind of weird chemistry could result from that. The final part of it is to look at the potential for surface infiltration. So surface infiltration basins, or in some places, people have done what they call AgMar, where you would take a flood irrigated field and just irrigate it earlier in the season or for longer than you would have otherwise. Not to the extent that you would kill off the crop, but that you could get more recharge into the system. And so with that, we can look at a much larger area because the stuff that's most relevant, you can actually see. Whereas the aquifer storage and recovery, you're pretty much like, where do we have wells? That's the only place we have any data. So we're looking at the soil types, the slopes of the sites, the geologic units that we have out there, the depth to groundwater. Are there canals or other sources of water nearby that could be used as sources of water for a project? And then the tricky part gets to be the distance to the river or other surface waters, because once you put that water into the ground, you know, that's step one. Getting water to go into the ground is something we can probably do. Right? The question is, when and where does it come out? And getting that right is much more ticklish than most people seem to appreciate. But, you know, it's easy to get water to go into the ground. Getting it to come out when you need it is fairly tricky, and even with the study that we do, you know, we'll be able to put some sideboards on that, but it's still going to be a very site-specific question to try and answer. So that's the overview for that study. I've got some fact sheets here if anybody's interested. Just give you a little more information and our contact information if you want more information. Thank you.
Great. Any quick questions for Andy? Thank you.
Hi, did you drill the 3 different sites that we talked about that day, basically? Yeah, we did 3 exploration wells, each of them was up 500 feet deep. And then we picked, so we drilled 3 wells, 500 feet deep, each at, you know, 3 sites. And so now we're looking at what's the chemistry of the water in those zones. We did what we call mini aquifer test, where we just pumped for like 2 hours to see where we have the most transmissive aquifers, so the most productive aquifers that could be used. And also looked at sieve analysis and looking at what the aquifer material, when we leach them, what elements do we get coming off? So like, do we have arsenopyrite or something like that? It could release metals that you wouldn't want to be part of a project. So we're screening those 3 sites right now. You know, we've got 2 out of the 3 look pretty good. And we just need to work through the rest of the data and analysis to decide which of those is actually the best. And then we'll plan to do an aquifer test at that site. So like a 72-hour test where we get a much better idea of how much water can you inject. Are we seeing any change in the water levels in the shallower aquifers because of that, or is it well confined and the water staying where we put it, which is what we want?
All right, guys, let's take a break. Is there anything else, any other new business? All right, let's take a quick break. I'm really excited to get Sean up here to talk about Conifer Encroachment. Coffee up, snack up, and we'll get this technical issue resolved.
My name is Sean Claffey. I coordinate what we call the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership. I'm technically employed by the Nature Conservancy. I live here in Dillon. I'm going to talk to you about conifer expansion. I think the title was in East Pioneers, but I'm going to talk a little broader than that. Definitely zoom into the East Pioneers as much as we want to, or talk about that project. But I also realize this is the first time I've got to address this group directly about what the Sagebrush Partnership is and what we do. So I'm going to start out with just a little bit there. I'll try not to do too much. I took a lot out. Is that a little better? Yeah. Okay. So the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership, we are not a legally recognized entity. We're not a 501c3 like the Big Hole Watershed Committee. We're just the name given to a group of partners who have been working a long time in this region. And actually, I've given credit to the Big Hole CCAA program in recent stories and interviews about the Sagebrush Partnership and what we are, kind of give credit to this collaborative spirit in Southwest Montana that I happen to walk into, a bunch of good partners working together. And so that culture was already here. So the partnership includes all these people added to all land management agencies, nonprofits, small watershed groups as well. And it started, we gave it a name, you can go to the next slide. We gave it a name in 2017. It was actually Jim McGee, you guys know well, called a meeting in Dillon. Basically, folks were noticing conifer expansion, we were starting to pay a lot more attention to it. Other threats to sagebrush biome, we were starting to pay a lot more attention to. And folks have been working on conifer expansion since the early 2000s. It's not a brand new thing, but we've definitely scaled up in the last 7, 8 years. And so there was this recognition that these were the primary threats to our rangelands across the West. And this is what the Sagebrush Partnership has adopted, and the things we are addressing. So I'm going to talk a lot about conifer expansion. Barriers of wildlife movement, primarily fences in a lot of cases, but any infrastructure, invasive annual grasses, primarily cheatgrass here, thankfully. And then riparian and wet meadow degradation, which you guys are well versed in through the watershed committee. And of course, fragmentation, all those things can fragment habitat, fragment our rangelands, but also can conversion or loss of branching on the landscape. So through the partnership, we are trying to increase the pace and scale of stewardship work to address those threats to maintain biodiversity. It's not really about, I shouldn't say this, but it's not really about sagebrush. It's not really about, it's not that we don't like trees, we're trying to maintain diversity across the landscape. In addition to that, we're trying to increase community connection. We're trying to maintain this land ethic or a culture of stewardship in Southwest Montana that exists here because we are still connected to the landscape in this region. So that's what the Sagebrush Partnership is trying to do. Go to the next slide. And just a little more history. So I worked for the Nature Conservancy, but it wasn't until 2018 that my position was created as the conservation coordinator. So one of the outcomes of that 2017 meeting that Jim McGee called was, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had a coordinator to keep everyone connected on who's doing conifer removal, who's doing this, who's doing that. And so that's how my position was created. The Intermountain West Joint Venture, the BLM signed an agreement. They created this Partners in the Sage program, or Partner to Conserve Sagebrush Rangelands. And then some other funding from Fish and Wildlife Service, ConocoPhillips, etc. Nature Conservancy actually raised their hand and said they would host the position, and I was hired in 2018. So that's a little history there. And that's important because we've come a long ways. We've had a lot of success, a lot due to conifer expansion and the attention we've gotten from that. So the next slide. Well, in my position as a conservation coordinator, my job description said do all these things: increase communications internally, increase external communications, attract science, facilitate science, do more projects, facilitate more projects. It was pretty apparent right away. And actually right away, I started figuring out how we could hire more capacity. I was one position. How can we get more people working on these threats? So that next slide will show where we're at today. We have 6 full-time staff based out of Dillon. Not all of them are with TNC. We have a riparian restoration project manager who's working closely with the committee on a couple of projects right now. We have an invasive annual grass coordinator in the Beaverhead Conservation District offered to host that position. We have a wildlife project coordinator who's Colin Peterson. He's working for National Wildlife Federation and doing primarily fence modifications, fence removal for wildlife. In addition to that, while we don't have a Fish and Wildlife Service Partners program biologist, TNC is hosting Cass Kohler, who you might know, helping Fish and Wildlife Service implement their CCA here at the time being. And then most recently, we hired a monitoring coordinator because we've ramped. I'm going to get into how much work we've done, and we need to also ramp up how much we can monitor that work as we go. We hired a monitoring coordinator with Montana State University. She's working under Jeff Mosley. So in addition to that direct full-time staff, you guys have heard of the Youth Employment Program, the local conservation corps we started. They've had 2 full-time staff, some numbers down here, 30 employees of summer 24. And then we've attracted other things. You mentioned Pheasants Forever. That's due to a lot of our success in addressing those threats. The BLM was designated a restoration landscape a couple of years ago, attracted more capacity to help us implement more active restoration across the landscape. So next slide. Again, that's what we're addressing. I'm not going to talk too much about any one of these. Happy to answer questions if you'd like. And now just going to dive into conifer expansion, I think. So you can just keep going. So real quick, what is conifer expansion? We kind of talk about it in 2 different veins. There's infill of woodlands. So you can see this aerial photo from 1942 compared to today. Well, not actually today, because now that's been logged, but a few years ago. You can see that infill woodlands. And then primarily when we talk conifer expansion, when you hear it, or conifer encroachment, use those terms interchangeably, is expansion into other habitat types. And I'm going to focus on rangelands here. But we've lost most of our aspen due to conifer expansion on the BVRD. I've heard up to 90% of our aspen is gone, primarily due to the exclusion of fire and Doug fir taking over. And then our riparian habitats as well. Mountain mahogany is another one we're also working in as well, again, to maintain that biodiversity across the landscape. So next slide. And just some, nomenclature wise, you'll hear folks talk about phase 1. Phase 1 conifer expansion, real light density. That's where your shrubs and your grasses are still dominant. You can hit it again. Phase 2, you got a co-dominance going on between trees and your shrubs and grasses.
there's not really a percent cover that's been tied to it, it's more this dominance thing, and then phase three is where now your trees are dominant, it's either converted to woodland or it's on its way to converting to woodland. Keep going. So what do we know about conifer expansion in the high divide here? So if you haven't seen this map before, we had conifer expansion mapped for the entire area in 2019. That's all that purple on that screen. And so the conclusion was over 1 million acres have been impacted in the high divide and half of that on our rangelands. Next slide. Well, this is that report here. I'm probably not going to be able to go to this link. I'll have some links at the end. I would encourage you guys to go check out. There's these tools online you can go to, and you can slide back and forth the historic imagery to today, and it is mind blowing. Yeah. So I was wishing I could show you guys that, but this model is incredibly accurate. I'll have some other pictures of that as well. You can go to the next slide. So where is it at? This is the breakdown of where those acres are. You can see it's 40% of the Forest Service, 20 BLM, 30 private, DNRC, FWP, just under 10% of it. So, and I throw this in there just to remind myself to say it started long before 1950. That's just the best, most complete aerial photography we had to stitch together. So this is over on Cottonwood Bench looking towards the Snowcrest Range. Pretty stark difference there in tree cover. So the impacts of conifer expansion. Of course, as trees increase, we start losing our grasses and our shrubs. We start losing forage for wildlife and livestock. We also, as we start losing that native cover, we start becoming more susceptible to invasion of invasive species like cheatgrass. And I'll go into this a little bit more, but we started doing this work, or it started really ramping up around the West in the name of sage grouse, because some research came out that they'll abandon their breeding grounds with as little as 3 to 4% conifer cover on a site. They won't use it for nesting habitat anymore. The narrative has definitely shifted away from sage grouse and just sagebrush steppe habitat overall, even not just here, but across the West. In addition, I put this little brewer sparrow note here to remind me. In the back, if you're interested, this was just came out of less than a month ago. It's local research done down in Medicine Lodge comparing brewer sparrow nest success and where we removed conifers, where we didn't remove conifers. And I mean, just real quick, what they showed was already tree invasion in Southwest Montana has caused a 30% decline in brewer sparrow. Brewer sparrow is important. It's actually a species of concern for the state of Montana. If nothing, this is really shocking. If nothing's done about conifer expansion right now, we'll lose another 60% of the population in 30 years. So this is real stuff that was published and it's out there now. There's a copy of this in the back. So next slide, Pedro. All right, forage. I don't have to, I just touched on it there before, but the individual who did that conifer expansion model for us is now working for the University of Montana with Dr. Dave Noggle. And they've really developed a lot of tools to quantify herbaceous loss or production loss due to conifer expansion. And some of these numbers here of what they've come up with, so I'll start over here in the red text, is just due to conifer expansion, Montana in 2022 lost nearly about 700,000 round hay bales, the equivalent of 700,000 bales a hay, round bales a day, equivalent to 11.5 million in forage value. So where we're working primarily is where the trees are really light. It's a little cheaper to work in those areas. Where you really start seeing that production loss is you get that cover 30–40%, and you can cut your production in half when you start reaching those thresholds. And then all of a sudden your treatment cost is through the roof. So not only you cost more money to do the work, you're losing money with production. So all this stuff, I'm going to provide some links at the end too that you can peruse all this through some pretty new websites that are out there to explain a lot of this. This is a local example again down in Medicine Lodge. So this group, one nice thing about the sagebrush, through the Sagebrush Partnership and getting started early and having the folks at University of Montana, we can kind of tap into some of that stuff a little more regularly, some of the cutting edge stuff they're working on. So they provided this example for us last year, but again, it's not just what we've lost, it's what we will lose if we do nothing. So you can see in the next 30 years at this one site, I don't have the acres on it, 5.7 thousand tons production would be lost over that time period by doing nothing at this site. So that's a real example there. All right, and I know you guys are interested about water, so you can kind of just click through this little graphic here. Pedro.
Yeah,
Kind of forgot it was animated.
that's great.
So I'm not gonna lie, like. With the water question, just like Andy was saying, once the water goes in the ground, we don't have a lot of information of when and how it comes out. And so it's no different, I think, when it comes to this. So there's not a lot of you're gonna be a little disappointed with what I have to share probably. I do have one study I'm gonna share. But the first three are not that exciting. There was a study, I think it was 17 or 18, where they compared juniper dominated rangelands where expansion had happened versus sagebrush and snow distribution. And basically, when you have those trees out in the rangeland, it breaks up the wind velocities, you get even distribution of snow across the rangeland. You don't get the drifting that you would with just open range. And so that's all this map shows is sagebrush down here, juniper here. You can see these later into the season where the snow drifts are persisting. If you go to the next slide, please. So with that study, they showed with this drifts, 9 days longer. Snow melt was delayed by an average of 9 days in that situation. So next slide. You can just kind of click through right there. Yeah, that's good. So this is just an example of when you start losing your ground cover as trees become thicker and thicker, you start losing your ground cover, you start getting more bare ground, you start having more opportunity for connected flow paths and more opportunity for concentrated flow and erosion. So your water has the opportunity to, it just runs off. You don't have those individual grass plants that are slowing things up, allowing paths of infiltration into the ground. So in addition to that, there's a degree of, I haven't seen a paper on this yet, but there's a degree of interception where you get snow or rain that doesn't touch the ground, it's getting intercepted by the canopy as well. So as there's a hydrologic process that's impacted by expansion overall. Okay, and this, again, this is just showing what we can tell. I guess what I'm told to talk about when it comes to water and conifer expansion is soil moisture. What we do know is you increase soil moisture and water availability in those soils after you remove trees. And this graph over here, again, shows years since treatment on the bottom and days of soil moisture on the vertical axis there. And you can see the greatest increase in days of more soil moisture in the red bar there, that's that phase 3. So the denser the trees, the greater response you have. And again, impacts on groundwater and tree flow are less understood at this point. But this is the one that I don't know why this isn't touted more. Maybe I'll have Andy dig into it. I'll send him something. It's funny. I met Andy in 2016 or 17. He helped me figure out how to. I was a hydrologist for the Beyond when I first moved here. Set up some staff gauges actually related to a riparian conifer removal project. And here I am. Talking about trees. Yeah. So this is over in Oregon, and the unique thing about this, why we don't have good data is we don't plan far enough ahead and get that pre-data that's needed. These guys did 11 years of pre-work. And they did side-by-side watersheds, and they took one watershed and they cut all the trees. And they measured before and after a couple different things here. So very similar site to us in elevation, precip geology. Small basins, 250 acres each. And again, they cut all post-European age trees. So next slide there. So Jensen was the control. The dark one was the control. Maize is where they cut all the trees. Treatment year right there. This isn't as compelling as the next couple, but you can see soil moisture, increases relative to Jensen after they cut the trees there. Next slide. So this is pretty neat. The top one is depth to groundwater in the untreated watershed. So these are groundwater wells. And what you want to look at in the treated watershed here is how flattened out these high points are after treatment. So you have before treatment, you get these spikes in groundwater level, and then afterwards, they're flattened way out. And in addition, the days that they were dry was reduced, and about 41 more days of water was recorded in those wells. Let's see if I can point out well number Yeah, well, number 6 is that red one here. You can see it went dry before treatment and never went dry after treatment. There.
Uh,
Okay, next slide.
I hadn't seen that one, that's great.
Yeah, and I have a copy of this, a little summary of this paper in the back as well. Looks like this, increasing water availability through juniper control. It's in the back. This was done by Tim DeBoot at Oregon State University. He was actually here in Montana presenting on this probably 7, 8 years ago. So this is spring flow post-treatment. The treatment line is right here when they cut the trees in that watershed. And so what we have here is the blue is the treated watershed, and it's gallons per minute, so it's a spring output. And the red is the control where they didn't cut the trees. And you really focus on that slope there. This is like September through December. What they found was the spring output increased 3 to 5 gallons per minute during this late season period. And really interesting in 2007 here, where Jensen, the control, where they didn't cut the trees, the spring went dry. There's no output there. But where they did treat, you maintained outflow, and it was even higher than pre-treatment output. So those are things when people ask me about water, like, on the record, which I don't know if we are or not. I don't usually say you're gonna get more water, your springs are gonna increase directly. I say what I've heard from folks who have been on the landscape a lot longer than I, that they see their springs come back, or they see things get wetter post tree cutting.
Pretty intimate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is another one too. This is a picture from a project from the spring, but we think about fuel loads as well and severity of wildfire when it does happen. So when sagebrush converts to phase 2 expansion, fuel loads double, you get those higher fuels, heavier fuels. And then if it converts to phase 3, you got six times more fuel there to burn. And so with more fuel, greater chance of high severity fire. And what we have now is a very resistant sagebrush steppe landscape, very resistant to cheatgrass, very resilient to disturbance. But if we get those high severity fires, we're going to lose that resistance and resilience. So that's one of these threats here as well, kind of stack on each other.
I got a question for you.
Yeah,
If that fire goes down into that sagebrush and it sits there and burns all that, you lose all your soil. You know what I mean? Or do you? You got nothing to make the cover, but raising across the top of it.
yeah,
It takes that, but it leaves the bottom, and it's when it sits there
yep,
and burns, then you're SOL.
exactly. That heavy fuels will burn there for a long period of time and fry that soil. And what we used to have is more frequent, faster moving, lighter fires moving through grass and sagebrush. And exactly that, it wouldn't sit there and cook that soil like that. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, like that one year up there in Canada where that fire ran along, what was it? 35, 40 miles an hour, and it took the top off. And that was in about February of that.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what, I'm not sure what I have next year.
That's the thing you got, is you watch out for it, it's when it burns that out, you're out.
Yep.
You know,
If you don't have mineral soil, it's not a lot.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
that's where, and then that's where the weeds pop up.
So all of our, our goals across the board, working on all ownerships, private and public, are all related to those impacts of conifer expansion. But I'll highlight most of the funding for these treatments comes from wildlife and fuels programs and within our federal agency partners. And again, our focus is preserving habitat diversity and land health and the resilience of our natural resources and things like drought and wildfire. In addition to that, again, I mentioned earlier, it's not just a war against trees and now we don't like trees. Some people might differ, but we are looking at the ecological site. We're looking at tree form, we're looking at growth form, and we're looking at soils. You got low productive, scabby, rocky soils, where naturally wildfire moving through those flashy fuels would run out of fuel to carry. That's where juniper and limber pine and things would persist historically, or a fire would not carry. So that's where we stop cutting typically. as well. We leave those, there is such a thing as juniper habitat, rocky ridges, south facing rocky slopes. There's clues to that, we're looking at soils, we're looking at growth form of trees, if it's a Christmas looking tree, it's usually pretty young, you get the flat top, that thing's done growing, it's an old mature tree, you got skeletons. Anyhow, it's a lot of nuance to what we're doing and where we're cutting, and especially where we're burning. The other thing we are trying to do is stack projects as far as how we prioritize and where we're working, trying to build on existing work to create landscape scale change. This is a shot, so this is our entire project area. I'm not gonna be able to go to our web map, unfortunately, because I wanted to pan around and show you guys some stuff in these pioneers. But everything in green on this map has been cut. Everything in yellow is a preliminary polygon that's in some form of planning. And then this is a zoom in area of the South Tobacco Roots. In the Ruby watershed alone, we've got 26.7 thousand acres after this year. And you can see it's across all ownerships there, public, private, BLM state, not quite on the forest yet, but hopefully soon. All right, real quick, we're going to treatment methods here. Go ahead, Pedro. So hand crews to start. So what we call lop and scatter treatments. So cut and lop, cut and pile, or cut only. So what we're looking at here is a lop and scatter treatment where chainsaw crew will come in and cut the tree down, remove all live limbs, buck everything up into 5-foot chunks and get everything down below sagebrush height. It's by and large, the most work we've done across the landscape. We can also cut and pile when densities get higher. I'll go ahead. This is just a shot over there in the tobacco roots, and it's kind of, all that open ground had trees on it, as far as you can see. Every small little ridgeline you can see had trees on it. Even across the valley over here, that hard line of trees, you can't really, you can see the expansion there maybe, but we've done a ton of work over there. It's all connecting, really create landscape scale change. And again, I mentioned fast moving wildfire through grass and sagebrush. And we heard the term low-tech process-based restoration that the stream world has, kind of hijacked over the years. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's also process-based restoration of our uplands, and that would be fire and grazing. So those are natural disturbance processes in our uplands that we're trying to restore and maintain. This is just real quick, just an example of a specific project where this was the first time in the state. So what we're looking at is Mill Gulch outside of Alder over there in the South Tobacco Roots. This entire yellow outline is about 3,000 acres. And, the nice thing, working through the Sagebrush Partnership is bringing all these different entities who can do different things. And so we have a piece of private ground here, a piece of state ground, different private landowner, BLM, different private landowner. And we were able to burn this whole thing this spring and kind of two different entries, BLM burned and then DNRC burned. And this is the first time in the state that the DNRC was burned and brought their crews and burned on private land in sagebrush habitat. We got approval from the sage grouse oversight team of the DNRC to do this. And we have approval from them on a few more projects here moving forward as well. Awesome. So it's a big positive step forward, kind of aligns with that House Bill 83 that was passed this last year, as far as increasing the use of prescribed fire across the state. And the DNRC has stepped up in who they're hiring and they've shown up to implement. I think what they learned through this, I'll say, is they don't have the capacity to do it like we needed. And so that's going to be a barrier moving forward. But I think we're all trying to increase our capacity to assist with prescribed fire. Super cool. And why do we need fire? Again, it's a natural process. But just if we don't use fire, we're going to be back to these same sites in 20 to 30 years. By using fire, we increase the longevity of these projects by at least double, I'd say. And I will say, largely, it's public lands doing the bulk of the burning on the work we're doing. But that's one of the points of emphasis here is how do we figure out how to enable more work on private lands. So, and then finally, I'll touch on this a little bit more here in a few more slides, but going in with equipment, whether that be mastication or mulching on site or harvesting for utilization. So we've done a little bit of this as well. This is an example of a project we completed last year where 1953, obviously no trees compared to recent aerial imagery. And that's a great example of how accurate this model was, all that purple showing where the new trees were. So this is a project, I'm gonna show you some pictures or maps from a logging project we did. This is where that was. So now this site looks like this again. And yeah, let's keep on going. So just a summary, I think there's a couple things that fly in there, maybe just as a heads up. There we go. So since 2017, I'd say 815 acres is what we completed as a partnership, as we were just figuring this stuff out. You can see things steadily ramp up. 2023 was our largest year, 15,000 acres cut that year. And a lot of this was due to the NRCS. You guys have heard of TIPS, I think, through your water development tip, right?
Yeah, that the CCA uses,
Yeah. So we had one of those in the Ruby GNRC Forest Action Plan, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well as contributed lately to really up the acres we're able to complete. Next slide. And that's pretty even break across private and public, just a little more lean on private as after last year. So about 60% on private. This number is closer to 60,000 acres now cut total. And then just the total goes up today, so nearly 9,000 acres in the Big Hole Watershed. And that East Pioneers project as a whole is 2,100 acres. So this is all done. How are we getting so much work done? You guys are very familiar with this because you do it. This is what you guys do, is you figure out who the partners are, you bring the money together and figure out how to get it done. You'll like my next slide here. It's a really fancy one. Didn't really spend the time putting the graphic together, but so something like East Pioneers is happening because the Big Hole stepped up to participate in this work and carry the contracts. But it's been it's a partnership effort. The BLM has an agreement with TNC, with Big Hole, U.S. Forest Service has an agreement with Big Hole Watershed Agreement, or Big Hole Watershed Committee and TNC. And then you guys, of course, have brought in RMF and MDF money to make it all happen. And then our experience on the ground doing a lot of this work, and maybe a little lack of capacity at the moment, been able to help you guys out and following through with these contracts.
Yep.
So I think that's the value of the partnership. It's not just leveraging money, we are leveraging administrative capacity and technical expertise. So the NRCS doesn't have the privilege of having an interdisciplinary team like the BLM does. So I go out with an ID team like with the BLM and hear different resource backgrounds. I can bring that perspective to the NRCS and help them plan projects better. Because when folks like Sarah Jane or whomever go see a project, they don't know who did it, they don't know what land ownership is. If it's done wrong, it's going to affect our ability collectively to do this work. So we're trying to standardize how we're doing this and communicate and do it right across all ownerships. Yeah, just click a couple more times there. There we go. So again, just an example, the Big Hole stepping up and doing this work, and other nonprofits stepping up and doing this work is so important as far as us scaling up. The green bars over here are Forest Service funding contributions, and the green line is acres cut on Forest Service. And you can see it was in 2022, 2023, I can't remember where you guys signed your assistance agreement for doing conifer work specifically. And it's really carried the load or been able to up our effort on Forest Service lands, which is not just important for the Big Hole or the East Pioneers. If you go to the next slide, it's important because as I started, oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I have not updated this yet. It's been kind of busy since then, I guess. But it's not just important for the Big Hole. When the Big Hole Watershed Committee steps up and takes on this workload in the Big Hole, it allows the rest of our shared partner capacity staff to manage all the rest of the projects across the, the high divide landscape as well. So it's a big, that work multiplies across the landscape. Yeah. Again, this is an old slide, so all those numbers are off. I can't click on these, but what I wanted to share is 60,000 acres of conifer removal as far as the stream restoration or wet meadow restoration projects, where we're installing those Z-dike structures or those rock structures, the gully erosion control structures. We've installed about 2,100 structures so far, a little over 22 miles of drainage impacted. About half of that on public, half on private as well. We're going to spray about 3,000 acres of cheatgrass this fall, late September, early October. Our biggest effort on cheatgrass right now is mapping it. We know it's everywhere, but at what level and what's our strategy before we start really investing in it. So we're getting out there and trying to figure out where I'll call it our core of the core is. So where do we not have a lot of it, and where do we have a chance to get ahead of it?
Good luck.
Yeah. Well, we're going places where there's not a lot. And there's an opportunity to hold it, but it's gonna be ongoing. It's not going away.
I got a question.
Yeah,
With like lodgepole, see, it's designed to be cut up, harvested up to about 100 years. You know what I mean? The harvest that, it grows back on its own. You don't have to seed it or nothing, they'll come back on it. But you gotta harvest that up to 100 years, maybe a little bit more than that.
yeah,
Compared to like, like your fur takes a lot longer than. If they do that where I live, there, part of my house. I've got for springers in there. And they're that big, and they come from across the river years ago. And then when we had it, we turned around and relogged it, and they come back on the chain.
the fur. Yeah. Well, this stuff is challenging. So what I'm gonna go into now is, again, part of the Sagebrush Partnership was we're not just trying to get acres done, we're trying to do it in a way that really matters. How can we really maximize its benefit to our community here, and how do we make it last? How we just bake it into our culture and our community as much as we can. So one of these ways, we can just go to the next slide here, is through this conifer expansion work, there's an opportunity to utilize this material. So in addition to all these fuzzy objectives, we just want to provide more work. We provide more work, we're gonna do a lot of things. We're gonna talk about process-based restoration. I mean, we need that too, and we need that work opportunity as well. That's a process to restore, dignity to people. So what we've learned with conifer expansion, we can't just go out and try to get the real scattered stuff. But through that mapping effort, we had an analysis done last year, or the year before, I can't remember now, last year. What we learned is there's nearly 70,000 acres of expansion that's over 20% canopy cover. 20% is a pretty general threshold for, you can't just leave the material, you're gonna have to pile it, burn it, or you have to haul it off site. There's too much material to leave. We also, the average diameter of trees in that is about 8 inches diameter breast height. So in about 30,000 acres, that's on private, which is a big deal because there's not the administrative process we have to go through on public lands. Just a real quick comparison here. So what they found was 21 bone dry tons per acre in this conifer expansion, this Doug fir expansion. And so 200 acres, 420 bone dry tons. That Darby boiler that heats their schools over there only takes 375 bone dry tons of fuel chips annually. So it's not a real high bar. We can figure out how to, I mean, we could harvest 200 acres a year probably. And it's not the only extra woody biomass out there either. So go to the next slide there. So this is a project, this is that project I showed, that logging all 100% Doug fir expansion. These are some of the decks. It's not the prettiest wood, but some real wood there.
It all looks like a bird.
It is, yeah. It's all fir, it's all high taper, tapers real fast, real knot or branches all the way to the ground. Nobody wants it kind of Doug fir. But there's a lot of volume there. And fortunately, in this project, we had some folks figure out how to use it and get it offsite. So the idea is we're just gonna, at least my thought is, we're just gonna keep providing the opportunity to make this material available and see who comes up with an idea of how to make money on it. And we have an outlet for this material, and then we have an outlet for all that stuff that ends up in slash piles off conventional timber sales as well. But, on the next slide there, Pedro, a lot of challenges with it. Don't have the infrastructure anymore. We don't have the trucks to haul short wood out. We don't have the people who want to deal with it either, because they've been a pain in the butt. So we're kind of trying to reinvent this as we go. Again, if we offer the work, I figure people will figure out how to get it done. That's what we're learning so far. So I guess just real quick, being realistic about it, that first project, about 70 acres, went to firewood, could go for a little bit of post and pole. There was some saw material in it. And then some niche uses like this worm fence. They use a lot of our wood for that. Let's see, what do I want to share about that? So that's the short term. If we can make this wood available, that's what we think it's going to be utilized for. Once we can demonstrate we can get it out of the hills efficiently, we start working with partners, other businesses, to start investing in other infrastructure for chipping and using things at larger scales. So that's our plan there. And we also start talking to businesses and other commercial facilities who would entertain the idea of converting to some biomass energy consumption. So that's a multifaceted and long game. In the meantime, we're getting habitat work done. So is there a play button on here? This is that logging project.
Yep.
You can see the delimiter in the background, some slash piles. This was just last week. It was pretty exciting. You can see there are some island pockets of sagebrush still, but that was the last of about 20 sagegrouse I flushed out in the middle of what was forest, more or less. So a lot of grant funders and whatnot.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is where.
These are some of the resources that are out there. This Landscape Explorer, if you just were to Google Landscape Explorer, you'd probably find it. But that's that tool where you can use that slider bar. You can zoom in anywhere and look at anything, compare historic imagery to today. There's this new thing, ConiferEncroachment.com, just came out a week ago or so. It's got the latest and greatest on impacts to forage, water, and all the information you can find. And then finally, I just threw this on here, but we don't have time to look through it all, but we do have some videos and other resources locally created around conifer expansion and around our logging operations and prescribed fire. So that's it. I took these slides off.
No.
So who hosts ConiferEncroachment.com?
Yeah, you should have bought that domain.
It was put together by the Working Lands for Wildlife team through the NRCS.
Yeah.
I believe, through USDA. All right, I talked real fast, not real.
Well, that was a lot to get through. Thank you.
So,
Betty, you got a question?
Took out mountain mahogany too in this process.
so we're trying to preserve mountain mahogany.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank Kevin.
Yeah, sorry.
He's getting upset.
What are the meal you're gonna eat?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we're trying to preserve, is those islands of mountain mahogany as well. We'll actually cut the juniper and stack them on top of the little mahogany that are brought to the ground. Try to protect them for a couple of years.
I think there's a, last year, I don't know this year, but last year there's about 1,500 wood pellet plants throughout North America. There's some tax benefits for small and mid-sized pellet manufacturing. And they partner up with groups like you because that's exactly the kind of biomass they're looking for.
Yeah.
And because of the tax credits they're given, and they have a great in user, and the fact that I'm trying to go to Europe because of the Green Deal.
Yeah.
The EU, when they're gonna create 100% of their energy. The green energy and closing down coal plants, and it's an easy fix to just put pellets in, but I don't know if there's any that locally or close by, but that might be something you might want to look into.
That's a great idea, and we need to keep looking into it. I know I worked with the county Chamber of Commerce, Rebecca, over the winter, and they had a proposal to get it was a biomass development something score to try to attract those companies from Europe to come here and invest in.
There are actually companies here, but they actually end up selling about 90% of their pellets because of the market in Europe. So you get a lot of money, so consequently they pay or at least remove that stuff for free.
Yeah, no, there's potential there.
I have one other question. I was down in the Centennial Valley, and I noticed there wasn't anything in the form of conifer into the valley floor. There's, it's mostly all sagebrush. And I went to the wildlife refuge, and they had some things about replacing the bison through cattle grazing because they're trying to keep the grasses short, and they're trying to, create sagebrush type of terroir. So I'm curious, obviously, without the bison, some of it's being grazed by cattle, you're still getting this expansion of the conifers. Do you encourage after post, remediation grazing? Is the grazing help to keep the conifers down once you cut them back?
Well, that's interesting. I'm not sure I have a direct answer for you, but I think what caused conifer expansion, how did it begin? Part of it was unregulated grazing back in the 1800s, turn of the century, removing fine fuels, removing that competition. I think where we see So that, what that did is that removed the fine fields for fire and carry for one, but it also removed competition directly, potentially. And where we see the highest densities or the most Doug fir expansion happening is where your densest sagebrush is. So, you know, Doug fir is a shade tolerant species and it'll use those little sagebrush plants as little nursery plants to grow. So I feel like with current management, if we, you know, graze appropriately, we're not going to encourage woody species competition, sagebrush or Doug fir.
Through grazing, will they actually graze on the seed?
No. Had a guy with goats call me this spring, but not going anywhere with that yet.
They'll eat conifers.
Yeah,
Goats will, yeah.
yeah, there's not enough per acre to
Yeah,
make them targeted.
yeah, they'll eat. Yeah.
Donate everything else, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions for Sean? Yeah.
I just have a comment. The first thing you said is a diverse landscape is a healthy landscape. And when you have working groups like this, that is very diverse in who's in it, and then a number of those groups together really improves the whole landscape.
Yeah. You just nailed it. I mean, that's what's happening. Nothing formal about the Sagebrush Partnership, but we're just getting things done through relationships with a very diverse group of people.
Yeah, it's great. I like that. We gotta bottle that up.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Kim?
Sean, generally, some of the seminars I've been at in regards to Conifer Encroachment, they talk about premium grass and forage and how that impacts those. And the premium grass and forage is where it takes the water down into the soil. With sage grouse, we're ending up with late cereals, at least in southeastern Idaho, late cereal, successful sagebrush where canopy covers 50%. You don't see that much in Montana. The group I'm working with is targeting 200,000 acres of late cereal sagebrush. Because you gotta be careful if you don't manage the sagebrush, which is a fire species too, you end up with late cereal. And chances of losing the sagebrush ecosystem can be quite great if you have too many fuels. So you're talking about conifers, but in areas where you have a lot of sagebrush, those need to be in the mosaic also. For the health of the research and sagebrush.
Completely agree. So yeah, I think prescribed fire, right now we're doing it under we're attaching it to non-renewable projects.
Right.
But it's appropriate to the sagebrush ecosystem.
Sure.
On its own.
What's the risk tolerance level for fire and liability and all that? What's that looking like these days? 'Cause I know that's a big part of the hesitation, right? To put more fire in the landscape is sort of who carries that liability.
Yeah, is anyone versed in House Bill 83 before I try to say anything about it?
A little, well, not, you say something about
Okay, so, as of right now, nothing's changed as far as liability goes, but what House Bill 83 is attempting to do, and a couple things, is, as I understand it, develop some sort of training or certification or some level of you've taken this, you know what you're doing, and therefore you qualify for this pot of money to cover liability if something goes wrong. So they're doing studies right now to figure out what does that pot of money need to be, and then how to develop these training programs for private landowners
Okay.
to take, or contractors to take to remove some of that liability burden, I believe. Is that your understanding somewhat?
Yes,
Okay.
but in Idaho, we have a big sagebrush here. And I was talking about among the collaborative writing, Kirby Carnegie land use plan. And I asked the forester, if I light a fire down the Adams Spencer Road, and gets up in you guys, he said, don't even think about it. When we put those planes on there, you won't have a ridge.
Yeah.
Because it'll cost you to put that. And they need, that's all encroachment that was burning.
I gotta throw this out to both of you. Especially on the sagebrush. You ever tried spike? The chemical. You know, you talk all this fire,
I'm sorry, I beg to differ with you. I've seen sagebrush burns in this upper big hole, and they'll get, maybe 10 to 15 years out of it, and then the sagebrush comes back. The place we're on up there managing, we've done spike work like 22, 23 years ago. And the sagebrush is just starting to come back, but, I mean, you're talking liability and everything.
Yeah.
And you can still do the mosaic pattern, even with the spike.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about it ecologically, what the impacts are of this versus that. I think managing for diversity.
Well, the thing we like about it is you still have the skeletons there, so you can still trap, the snow, not quite as well as when it's, leafed out, but, and the grasses come back. The only thing I didn't like, and you kind of hit on it, was you can't get a lupine problem.
Right, and the cows don't like that, right?
Oh, God, no.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrible with your cows. I will say that with the prescribed fire at the high elevations, you do see a flush of lupin,
So
larkspur, and.
I guess there's no.
2 years later,
answer
yeah.
Anything.
And you're treating the sagebrush to open up range, to open up more
Get
grass,
more forage.
get more forage for cattle.
Water into that, still the same.
Yeah, but it's kind of like what you talked about earlier, you gotta get water there, John.
Yeah, I know.
We also, I've seen some mowing. I've seen some really neat mowing done, on it. Every year, do a few hundred acres every year, kind of a mosaic, so.
Oh, you gotta have that.
I think, I can't articulate it, I should be able to, but restoring that natural process, there's more value there. I think than we understand, or that I can talk to right now. I believe. The nutrient cycling, the impact on everything else, I think there's something different there. That flush of forage we get may not be desirable for the rancher in year 1 and year 2, but I'll tell you what, everything else likes it quite a bit, as far as diversity goes.
Any other questions for Sean? All right, thank you.
Sleeper present program that takes what we do at a much larger scale. Next month, we will have the WRG group that's doing the mapping of all of the high alpine meadows that we're doing, so they'll talk more about that. They came out with us to Moose Creek. So that'll be it, and I will be seeing you over the Zoom machine. Y'all support Tana and help her out getting these meetings up and running and chairs put away and everything. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next month.